Thank you so much. I hope I'm audible. Uh, the topic of this panel discussion is attracting investment in urban areas, cities as an engine of economic growth. And as Chief Secretary spoke about, in the end, the role of smart cities, and as to how the 17 cities in the state of Uttar Pradesh is trying to create infrastructure for the development. So over the next, since we are already late, so possibly we'll not be taking more time. So next 20 minutes, we are going to discuss about what are some of the key elements, what should be our focus area in terms of finding out the growth, and what are the bottlenecks that we need to address from industry perspective. So, Mr. Kumar, I'll begin with you because what we observed that urban areas are considered to be an engine of growth. And during the pandemic, especially what we witnessed that there were a lot of repurposing of the infrastructure that we had. So it's not only about, the IT infrastructure, but any other infrastructure that we had. For example, under the Smart City program, some of the states were able to set up command and control centers. And we had around that time around 45 command and control center across the country. And what we noticed that even the healthcare department, which were not the nodal department, they were using those command and control center in order to provide the emergency response services. Would you like to share, based on your experience, given the fact that you come from a hardcore infrastructure organization, and that infrastructure is quite visible to people, what kind of challenges you witness and what do you see in a post-pandemic situation as we moved in? And if you could relate it to the Uttar Pradesh dream of $1 trillion economy and what role those infrastructure is going to play.
Thank you very much. I think with your permission, I'll kind of invert the question which you have raised because it's in two parts. One, of course, is the vision of UP government for a $1 trillion economy. And the second one relates to the smart cities and the impact of COVID on repurposing of urban infrastructure. I think I'd like to narrate a small story here. Almost 20 years ago, I was heading one of the industrial development corporations in the state. And at that time, we spent considerable amount of money for getting the DPR for the Xavier airport. All the clearances were there. Two very large, amongst the largest industry houses that time, actually put in their bids for that airport. But the matter didn't proceed for various reasons. And when I was shipping secretary in Government of India, and I was directed to come back to serve the state, one of the lists which I was given for projects to be implemented was again the Xavier airport. I was extremely happy because it was one of the dream projects which I had been associated. And immediately we had a great team. One of the members of that infrastructure team is with us, Mr. Avnish Avasthi. We got this thing updated, the DPR, got all the clearances, and I think the state government and the officers of civil aviation, they have done a great job in getting a bid from an excellent developer for that airport. And another 2 years, we'll see that airport fructify. Mr. D.S. Mishra mentioned about the inland waterways. It was during my tenure when the World Bank assisted project was taken up and the foundation was laid at Sahibganj as well as at Varanasi for the terminal. The expressways, Bundelkhand Expressway and the other expressways were worked out at that time. Meerut RRTS, the state government approval was given at that time. The point I'm trying to make is that there is a huge difference in the environment today in both deciding as well as implementing the project. And I think it's to the great credit of the Honorable Chief Minister that following the directions of the Prime Minister and his statement that we must look at a $5 trillion economy for the country in a time-bound fashion. It was an extremely challenging thing for CM Saab here in UP to say that, sorry, in proportion to our population, we will leapfrog and take this state to a $1 trillion economy. Now, they have worked out the contours of how it is to be done. The willingness is there, the environment is there, and the stars are aligned. So I think once we have a clarity of what we want to do, I have seen in almost 40 years of government service that once the roadmap is clear, the willingness is there, the political clearance is there, my apologies, getting work done, there is enough talent right here in this room. And therefore, while multiplying your GDP, state GDP by 4 times in a couple of years seems a very ambitious target, but if we all work together, the networking effect, the synergetic effect, and everybody's goodwill, I'm sure this is something which is available. Now, coming to the second point which you mentioned is the micro level issue in a way. But we all know that urban spaces have been the engines of growth. And those who have read history are very familiar that earlier we used to have only city-states, whether we have Europe, recently Vijayanagar has been in the news. During its heydays in the 15th century, it used to be the richest city after Beijing. Now again, it was a city-state. Today, when we talk in terms of IT for decades, it's been Bangalore. Of course, a lot of other units have also come up. So therefore, we find that there is something which happens when the densities increase by way of synergies, whereby the productivity gain is much higher. And that is what urbanization does to the growth process. Now, a strange thing happened when COVID hit us. 2 trends came out. Suddenly, people wanted to look at the suburban development because they found single houses probably safer than houses which are densely packed or group housing. Secondly, as you rightly said, that whatever resources were available, they were put to great use. Now, if you look at the first set of objectives when this smart city project came in, the idea was that these cities and these projects will work as lighthouses for the other cities. Basic idea was that if I do some project successfully here, it will become a model for other cities. And this is one great thing about networks, that more users are there which are using it, the better it is for everybody. We had seen it in mobiles. More people had mobile, the more utility goes up. So you mentioned about these command centers. I think this has been the stellar kind of achievement of smart cities. And I do recall that when I was Chief Secretary here and we were planning for Kumbh that year, 2 things we decided. A, create as much of permanent infrastructure as we can. Because normally a lot of infrastructure money is spent in Kumbh and then it goes away after the Kumbh is over. So Prayag had a very different kind of look after the Kumbh compared to earlier after the last Kumbh. Secondly, we had these funds available and a command and control center like in most of the smart cities was set up. They used it for Kumbh. During COVID, they used it for health services. But the fact of the matter is that once you have a facility like the command center, so much of data is supposed to flow in, and that is a lot of opportunities available for the private sector to link in, utilize that data for providing citizen-centric services. And to that extent, I think we all have a lot of ingenuity. Jugaad, I read, I had gone to Cambridge University, Judges School of Business. One of the professors has written this lovely book called Jugaad. We are internationally renowned for it. With or without Jugaad, we will reach the destination.
Wonderful. Now, Mr. Hans, I'll come to you. As Mr. Rajive was speaking about the fact that as to how the infrastructure that we put in place, those came quite handy, and why it is really important to have a permanent infrastructure as much as possible we can do that. That's also required a lot of collaboration between industry and government organization. And also the fact that we are now moving toward ESG. So our infrastructure has to be sustainable. Would you like to share, based on your experience from a PPP, private partnership perspective, what should be an optimal way of utilizing infrastructure, optimal way of financing sustainably any government project?
Okay. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And I just want to indicate that the response from Sir is a segue to my question. And listening to the presentation so far, I think that attracting investment into cities, or using cities as a catalyst to attract investment, looking at the vision for Uttar Pradesh, one, I think, should be targeted and intentional, where the efforts are very strategic and coordinated. And I am saying this because every vision which cannot get you scared is no vision. And $1 trillion in the next 5 years is very ambitious. Now, looking at the strategies that cities can deploy in terms of bringing on board strategic partnership through PPP, I think, one, we should understand what kind of resources we have and the institutions that are available within the state. And that is what I call strategic partnership, first of all. You realize that you can have a system that is well coordinated with institutions and policies working. But if you are not able to have a sustainable system which looks at a human resource base, it will be difficult. So, thinking about how we can achieve this, one, I think it's important for us to look at the youth and what are the capabilities and the skills the youth have in this. You know, when we talk of smart cities, we talk of the infrastructure, we talk of the amenities around, but we hardly talk about the human resources that can drive this. And that is what I think going forward in the next 5 years, we must be very targeted and intentional in our effort. Bringing on board institutions, partners from other countries in terms of having PPP arrangements, it's necessary. Why? Because we might not have all the resources to do it. Now, strategic partnership through PPP in terms of how to finance projects, how to even implement policies is needed. And I think that Uttar Pradesh as a state can take the lead in this. And not only depending on what we have, but we can look at the companies that can come in that are willing to partner with us. And I want to say that how we can do that is to use statistics to project the strengths, and at the same time the weaknesses of the state. You know, data and statistics, when investors are able to get convinced with information, they come in to deploy efforts that come as a form of support to back a vision. So we must use statistics to define the strength and weakness. And I'm talking about weakness because sometimes if we don't know the weakness and we want a partner to identify that, it costs us. And if we are able to use statistics to define the strength and weaknesses, we are able to let them understand our strength much more. And that is important when it comes to PPP arrangement. Every partner, international partner, even local partner, would want to understand the strengths and weaknesses of a system.
Absolutely, I completely agree with you, especially on the part of having a greater visibility across what you have, what you do not have, and how you can plug those gaps and the collaboration that one should have with the industry. So I think we have exhausted our time. So thank you so much, both of you, for being such a wonderful panelist. Thank you so much.